Okay, so good morning to everyone and welcome once again to another MetaLogix Quick Take. This is the series where we take a small tidbit or concept or troubleshooting item or question and kind of explore it for 15 or 20 minutes and then open the floor to questions regarding. So yeah, it's a pretty cool little series. I really enjoy doing them and I hope that you guys get value from it. My name is Roy Martinez. I think I've worked with the majority of the guys in the list that I see right now. But yeah, I'm the lead support representative and also sales engineer for SharePoint Backup. I've got quite a few years of experience working with this tool since we originally created it over at the Idera company. And I've had the opportunity thusly to watch its features and functionality grow over time since the 1.0 release, right? So I've kind of seen it all when it comes to backup. I'm constantly reminded that there's plenty more to see in terms of SharePoint and SharePoint Backup. So I'm happy to continue growing with this tool. So today we're going to be talking about some alternative options for mount and granular restore. The original title of today's session was going to be setting different staging paths for mounts, but unfortunately I've got a couple of little kinks that I couldn't get wrestled out in my environment to give us a true proper demonstration of that. Primarily, I needed to get a cluster set up and I didn't get it in time, unfortunately, but there's plenty we can talk about in terms of providing some alternative options here for our mount and granular restore processes. So we're going to focus kind of more generally in that direction. So specifically, we're going to talk about what are those alternative mount options that we do have available. We're going to talk about mounting from a backup file, a .bak, and go through some examples. We're going to mount from direct raw MDF and LDF data files. We're not going to do any examples, but we'll talk a little bit about the SharePoint native backup and how to mount from there. And then we're going to do some live linking to actual live content databases. And then furthermore, we're going to look at some options we have to leverage the farm backup restore section of the tool to stage out data files to different file system locations as needed. So yeah, without any further ado, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. So I've got this environment here that consists of a single farm consisting of a couple of servers, one of which is called SharePoint 2013A, which is the machine we're on, and the other of which is called SQL, which is right here. And that's going to be my SQL Server SharePoint database host, right? So this is the farm we're going to be using. It's very simple. It's not probably a very direct comparison to anything in your enterprise environments, but it should help us to illustrate some of these concepts pretty simply. So let's go ahead and fire up the tool. Let me close a couple windows here. Let's fire up SharePoint Backup. Give it some time to come up, and then we're going to jump directly into the granular restore section of the tool once this guy launches and get right to the nitty-gritty. So here's SharePoint Backup. We're all familiar with this interface. By default, we're looking at the farm backup and restore view. Today we're going to be talking specifically about granular restore, so let's go ahead and jump over there. Right, so at the outset we have a bunch of different ways to get to our mounting wizard, one of which is down here, this little button, one of which is in this section in the ribbon, and then one of which is up here in this alternate ribbon. So I can jump directly to it from there. And let's just go over our options here. Now, we've talked about this before, I'm sure, on several occasions, but just to reiterate it and drive it home, one of the values of this tool, obviously, is having a one-stop shop that you don't have to refer anywhere else to for getting all your content backed up and then restored at both the disaster level and then alternatively at this granular level. And this middle option is the representative of that quote-unquote one-stop shop scenario. We've taken backups with our tool, we've stored them where we want with our tool, and now we plan to granularly restore data from within them using our tool, using our own backup set. But it's absolutely, in my opinion, an incredible value proposition for this tool to be able to fit within, so to speak, alternative disaster recovery strategies. And by that I mean, do we already have SQL Server or otherwise native processes in place to back up all of our content? Maybe we have a SQL team that handles that task quite well and has their own processes in place that they don't want to interrupt by introducing additional schedules from other sources that could, contend or compete with resources, over time. And I mean, the list of potentials for interrupting something like that, is pretty extensive. Obviously, if we get to control everything, it's a no-brainer solution. Just have our tool handle everything. But again, not every environment or enterprise is created equally, and you can really distribute a disaster recovery strategy between multiple teams. You can have OS level guys and IT guys doing one thing, taking snapshots of servers at the highest level. You can have a SQL team handling all the database stuff. And here we are as SharePoint admins, and all we really want to do is restore a document, right? So, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to approach what this tool offers. And one of those ways, obviously, is in a scenario where we have disaster recovery handled for us. We just want to be able to restore data. Now we have a couple of options. Now we have a tool that'll let us, back up stuff from SharePoint and restore stuff from SharePoint really simply, and that's all great. But let's say we want to leverage backups we've already taken with other technologies. And in this case, let's specifically focus on SQL Server. I have these back files. I need a document. How can I restore granular given that specific backup type? Well, backup lets us do that for sure, right? So the first option up in this wizard is to select a SQL Server.bak file. So I'm just going to run through this real quick and mount a BAK file just to illustrate the transparency between utilizing our own backup set versus utilizing a SQL Server native backup set. The end result is identical, just a couple of different steps to take in the wizard, essentially. This step is identical. We're identifying the SQL instance to which we're mounting our database. And just to review, for those of you who care to hear it, when we say mounting a backup set, we're talking about attaching a new database in a SQL instance. The whole methodology behind this concept is that we're creating a database representative of a point in time in a content database's history and life, right? So we've backed up content from content database A on the 10th. Today is the 15th. We want a document that existed on the 10th. So we stage that backup set as a temporary content database, and then we mine information from it using SharePoint APIs. That's the big picture story. So in our wizard here, we're defining where is it that we plan to stage that temporary instance of the content database from that point in time, and that's what we're defining here. This is the server called SQL. It's a default instance on my SQL Server. Click Next. And here's the only real difference in the wizard. Rather than selecting from a drop-down my Metalogix backup set, I'm now going to go drill to the location of a BAK file. So in this case, I've got a BAK file here. I need to remember to drill to it from the context of a UNC path. And why is that? Because at the end of the day, it's really SQL Server that's doing these mounts or attachments of these databases, and SQL Server needs to use UNC paths to find these locations. So I've designated a UNC path to where my backup is located. This could be a NAS, it could be a whole different file server, it could be anything. As long as this is resolvable, that's all we care about. We find this test.bak backup file. I'm going to go ahead and select that, and just like that, go next through the options, give it a name. I'm going to call this test BAK, test mount for quick takes. Here, I'm only monitoring one farm, but if I had multiple farms, I could designate which farm I plan to restore that granular data to. For instance, maybe the backup was taken from 2013A, But I've also got a farm called 2013B that represents a dev farm or a warm standby or a staging farm, and I want to restore some documents to that farm instead. I could designate that here. In my case, it's just the one farm, so it's kind of a moot point. And then that's really it. Summary is up. We click Mount. So what's happening now is we're submitting an operation to SQL Server. We're saying, hey, SQL Server, here's a back file. Can you essentially restore or attach it as this database name? And the database name we gave was testback. And there we have it, mounted and good. So over in SQL, we should see a newly created database called testback. Bam. Right? So that got created by our mount process. Essentially, SQL Server just restored that BAK file as that name. And now that there's a database in the instance, we can, via SharePoint APIs, interface with it and enumerate data from within it and show the SharePoint hierarchical structure from within it as if we were looking in SharePoint. And this we've gone over before. This gives us the power to drill in, identify documents, and go through the restore process. We won't cover that in this particular case, but just to give you a quick look, I mean, the mount end result is identical to if I had used a Metalogix backup set. So let's take another example here. And let's say that we want to restore, we have the data files on a location. Maybe, for whatever reason, the backup set was exposed or unzipped or decompressed or whatever the case may be. We have two data files. We have an MDF and an LDF file for database sitting in a staging location, and we want to restore from that. Same exact process. We identify the instance we're going to be mounting to. We identify the MDF and LDF files themselves in question. I don't know if I actually have any MDF raw, so let me see. Yeah, I think I'd have to go grab some real quick. But at any rate, the process is identical. I mean, we navigate to the location, we identify the, oh, you know what, I've got some right here. We identify the MDF and LDF file that we plan to mount. Let me just locate one here. These have all been groomed. Here we go. Locate the MDF and LDF files that we plan to mount. Open them up. Same thing. We've got a UNC path. This is a little different. Rather than restore, now we're asking SQL Server, hey, can you attach these data files as a database, which is essentially kind of the same thing as restore functionally from the SQL perspective. Mount of MDF, LDF for quick takes. So yeah, the attach is essentially functionally identical to a restore. It's just really creating a database based on these data files, right? Anyone who's familiar enough with SQL will probably be familiar with the idea of attaching a database or attaching a data file. The process from this side is, again, pretty much identical, but this time, it looks like I've got an issue. It might be, yeah, I think I've got an access issue, honestly, to that particular location. That's expected. I should mention then, so if the SQL Server service account, and in fact, we'll fix it real fast. If the SQL Server service account doesn't have access to the location where those data files live, we'll see that exact error message you just saw there, which was operating system error 5. It's a default error message bubbled up from SQL Server itself, just saying, hey, I don't have access to that location. Let me just update my stuff here so that we do. What I'm doing here then is just, and this is something I can do in my test lab. You may not have the option to do so in your enterprise environments, obviously, but I'm just going to change the account that my SQL Server is running as and bounce it. It's no problem for me to do that here, but obviously, I'm not advocating anybody go restart their SQL Server service in their production environment unless they're looking forward to disaster recovery, right? So that is done. So now I would anticipate that I'll probably be able to kick off that same mount operation successfully. I'm not going to do it. We're instead going to go to the next example. But yeah, so as you can see, the process is the same. The end result identical. For SharePoint native full farm backup, I don't have a native SharePoint backup. That's the only reason I'm not going to give the example. But again, process is identical. We're just identifying where does that SharePoint backup set live, and then we should see a drop down here of all the available backup sets, from within which we can select which specific content databases we plan to mount. This is more akin to the actual MetaLogix backup set option, right? Where we have a list of backup sets, and then once we've selected one, we determine which content database within it we want to mount. So that's kind of rare. It just obviously is contingent on the idea of having a native SharePoint backup available to work with, which I don't. Moving along, to me, the most exciting option in this wizard, and it's oft overlooked, and the reason is there's a handful of use cases for this, but link to a live content database. I'll give you an example. So let me link. Now I've got a SQL server I've identified. Now I'm linking to a SQL server that hosts SharePoint databases. Thus far, we've been identifying where we want to mount temporarily our staging content DB to restore from, and that could be any SQL server. It could be a dedicated standby SQL server that has nothing to do with SharePoint, wholly intended to host our mounts just to give us access to them so we can restore stuff. Now, however, I'm linking to an actual content database that's live and up somewhere. So I'm wanting to designate the SQL server that actually hosts said live database. It doesn't necessarily have to be live, but a content database nonetheless, sitting in SQL already somewhere. In my case, I'm going to use the example that I've got content in a particular web app and site collection, a drive, for instance, hasn't been backed up, but I know I want to restore that data to a different site collection, a different web. So my option here is I can actually directly link to that content database directly. So I'm going to populate that wizard with databases from that instance I've specified, which will hopefully succeed. And then I'm going to select the content database hosting the data that I want to restore over to my new location. So I'm going to pick JESP Web, and I'm going to mount that guy as this. Same option for the farm designation, and mount. Process is identical, end result is identical, but now we're in a unique situation wherein what I'm looking at in this backup, quote unquote backup set, it's really not a backup set, it's actually a content database. Now I'm mining the data from a live content database, JESP Web. I can see all the data in that content database, and I can subsequently restore it as though I'm restoring from a backup set, quote unquote restore it to a different location. So for instance, if I choose the documents library, let's say this document upload test, I know it lives in this content database, but I need it in another. I can now do an out of place restore of that document in its original location to the web app of my choosing. So for instance, if I want the document upload test in my RMSP web application, once you'll have to forgive my environment, but once it comes up, I can then select RMSP Web, my documents library there, and then quote unquote restore from the live location A to live location B. Now this, technically we're stretching the definition of the term restore, so to speak, but hopefully it's illustrated here the power and the value of this particular option. Now I don't want to refer to this as a migration because it's really technically not, I mean, theoretically this is kind of migrating data from one place to another, but from the context of backup, we're still restoring data. We're pulling data from a source location and getting it to the place it needs to be. Maybe it was deleted. Maybe these are two mirrored content DBs, or maybe this is a warm standby farm that replicates another farm, and we have and we don't have the replicator tool, so we need to be able to sync data from A to B. Let's say that on B, somebody deleted that document, and I need to get it back from the source A. Well, I've just done that. by linking directly to the live content database in my source location and restoring, quote unquote, to the target location. I hope that makes sense. I know that's quite a mouthful in one shot, but I think this is a powerful feature. And I think it's a really cool, oft overlooked concept that this tool offers, right? So that said, I'm running low on time. I got another 4 minutes or so before I can try to get 5 minutes worth of questions in before we convene. I just wanted to quickly take a look, and we're going to talk specifically about the concept of this MDF and LDF files. I want to just illustrate one more cool concept in terms of the mount location. So whenever we mount our backup sets, we are mounting and staging directly to a very specific location, and that location is this, as you can see in the summary here, this CDB files folder. That's where we stage by default with our own backup sets, and that's great under normal circumstances, but that means that we're dumping those full-size data files for the size of the database before compression into the same location that we're backing our stuff up to. And maybe our storage isn't that hefty there. Maybe we've got only enough space to put our backup sets and we haven't planned for making room for all these data files to stage for mount. Maybe we have another file location or a NAS where we'd rather stage those data files. In the case of a cluster, we actually include optional staging locations when you're working with a SQL cluster, but when you're not, it's kind of just always defaulting to that location. But never fear, we always have options. If we utilize the farm backup and restore section of the tool, we can perform a so-called out-of-place restore of the database. And really what that does is it just uncompresses our data set and puts the data within to a file location of our choice. So in this case, I've got a backup of all my databases. Let's say I need the data files. I want to mount RMSP web, but I don't want those data files to live on the backup location. I want to specify somewhere else. I'll do an out-of-place farm restore of just that database. And the first thing I get is a confirmation followed by a field where I am to designate where in the network do I want these files to go. And I'm going to designate backups 2, which I believe is the correct folder name. Yep. So I want those data files to get quote unquote restored out of place to that location. That means I'm just going to dump whatever's in that backup set that I've requested into this network location. When I click restore, provided it succeeds, absolutely, we should then see the data files for WSS content RMSP web get located in that UNC path. So what does that mean to us? That means that now in our granular restore, we have the option of mounting those newly created data files from that location, just as we would have done so for any other. So it's just you know, like I said, just a fun fact, nothing too crazy, but an alternate option you have at your disposal that you may not have realized for staging out data files to a different location than your primary or secondary backup locations, right? So now we can designate any network location we want, pull the data files from that location, and go forward with our mount as normal. So I'll stop there at 5 minutes till and open the floor to questions. I hope this all made sense. I know I have a tendency to talk fast at times when I'm enthusiastic about a subject, but if there's anything or any questions you guys want to throw out there, now's the time. I'll give 5 or 10 minutes for that. And if there are none, that's just as fine as well. Okay, looks like nothing coming in at this point. So that said, I think we've hit the exact right timing for the meeting. I'll go ahead and adjourn at this time, and once again thank everyone for attending and listening to me ramble about a tool that I'm pretty passionate about and I think is pretty cool. If we have any questions in the future, please feel free to leverage our support team, and with that, I will bid you all adieu. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you on the next Quick Take session. Take care.